Has reached 11 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started here. So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from today, and welcome to our August webinar series brought to you by CPS HR Consulting, your partner for HR in the public sector. In today's webinar, we'll be diving into the Fair Labor Standards Act, New Rules in Evolving Labor Markets, presented today by Igor Shegalev, CPS HR's Technical Specialist, and Vicky Quintero-Brashear, Client Services Director for CPS HR. Before we kickstart the session, I just have some quick housekeeping notes as usual. The webinar today is being recorded and will be accessible for replay. We will post the recording on our YouTube channel and on the CPS HR webinar webpage for your convenience. All attendees will be in listen-only mode to ensure the best audio quality for everybody. Please feel free to use the chat feature to engage in conversation and share your thoughts with one another. If a question pops up during the webinar, don't shy away. Please use the Q&A feature to send it in, and we'll tackle as many as we can during the presentation and towards the end of the presentation. Now, without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Igor and Vicky to enlighten us on the new FLSA rules. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Marissa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Vicky Quintero-Brashear, and I've had the privilege of working at CPS HR for the last 25 years. I help to provide direction to the consulting function at our organization, and I've had the opportunity to work across a variety of HR consulting areas, including classification and compensation, recruitment, test development, and test administration. And now I'll turn it over to Igor for his intro.
Yes, hi. My name is Igor Shegalev, and I've been with CPS HR since 2016, and I'm a technical specialist in the classification compensation team. I have 30 years of experience in both public and private sector human resources, and compensation classification, of course, is my specialty. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Igor. I'm excited to share our insights today as we explore the Fair Labor Standards Act, more commonly known as FLSA. As you know, the FLSA is a federal law in the United States that establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, and child labor standards, and it applies to most private and public sector employers. Let's review our agenda. Thanks, Igor, for switching that slide. Today, our agenda covers critical aspects of the FLSA and its implications for employers. The discussion will begin with an overview of the FLSA and its new rule, including the legal challenges it faces and the potential impacts on various industries. We'll then shift to examining current labor trends and the broader business environment so that we can provide context for understanding how these factors influence FLSA compliance. Next, we'll focus on the common FLSA violations that employers need to be aware of, followed by practical actions and guidelines that employers can take to ensure compliance. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a detailed review of the individual duties test, a key component in determining employee classifications under the FLSA. And now, as we dive into our content today, Marissa is going to launch a couple of polls for us so that we can get a sense of where everyone stands on a few key topics. So Marissa, go ahead and launch poll 1, please. Great. So our first question for you is, how confident are you in your organization's ability to correctly determine FLSA exemptions? In just a minute, we'll go ahead and close the poll and look at the results. We still have some people responding. Okay, Marissa, could you show us the results there?
So it was done on a rating scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being not very confident and 5 being very confident, just for clarification.
Okay, was that clear when people were answering?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we have a pretty good level of confidence here, it looks like, which is great. Let's go to our next poll, which revolves around the resources that folks use when they're conducting FLSA. So next one is what resources do you rely on? And I don't see that poll, Marissa, but maybe everybody else is seeing it.
Yes, they're answering.
Okay, okay, great.
Just let me know when you want to share the result, and I think you could see that.
All right, sounds good. Does it look like we're still getting responses, Marissa?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll let it go a little longer.
All right.
All right, I'll cut it off right here.
Okay, perfect.
And I will share the result.
All right. Excellent. So we're using a lot of internal resources. Actually, this kind of goes across the board. Some DOL guidelines, external counsel or consultants, and then good to see that previous experience or intuition is a little on the lower side, since these types of determinations probably do warrant an HR or legal team's eagle eye. Great. Well, thank you all for sharing your responses to the first 2 poll questions. We are going to have a couple more later in the webinar. And with that, I will ask Igor to start his presentation. Thanks, Igor.
Thank you, Vicky. And thank you for your responses. So the next slide, we will just review overall what is Fair Labor Standards Act and real quick what it covers. It passed in 1938, of course, and it was a busy decade. If you remember, well, you probably don't. I do. I'm probably that old, I guess. 1932 Norris-LaGuardia Act, unions. 1935 National Labor Relations Act, we call Wagner Act. And of course, 1935 and 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act that covered minimum wage, labor law, overtime provisions, hours work and records keeping. And in 1963, there was an amendment called Equal Pay Act, which, by the way, was later picked up by states. And today, at this point, 48 states have their own state Equal Pay Act, which is very much resembles the 1963 federal mandate Equal Pay Act. Here's historic timeline, just a major milestones. 1961, first time minimum wage surpasses $1. And 1963, of course, Equal Pay Act. Today's minimum wage, federal mandate is $7.25, was actually passed and published in 2009. And in 2016, there was an attempt to increase salary standard test, increase the threshold for employees who are exempt from overtime provision of FLSA, and it didn't pass. Now, this 2024, in April, the Department of Labor published new rule, and it goes into 2 phases. You also can see here how minimum wages were increasing over time. You can see that the highest increase, about 80% increase, was from a decade from 1978 to 1988. From $2.65, it went up to $4.25. And then again, $6.55 and so on and so forth. So today we're standing at $7.25, but that's federal. Of course, many states today have their own state minimum wage. The new rule is enacted and proposed in April 2024 and has two phases. Both phases, actually, one in July 1st of 2024 and another one in January, increase the salary standard test, the threshold for exemption, as you know. And there was a limited injunction issued by district court that now only applies to Texas. We also have second phase goes into effect in January 2024.
Sorry, just a really quick question.
Yes.
The January 2024, does that mean that phase has been enacted?
Yes, it went into effect on July 1st, 2024. The new, and this, by the way, this slide here shows the new July 1st, 2024 standard salary test for exemption.
Thank you.
So you can see that it went up from $35,568 currently, well, before July 1st, to $43,888. And of course, the highly compensated employee threshold also went up from 107 to 132,964, as you can see in this table. In January 1st, 2025, the standard salary test goes to 58,656 per year. Anybody who is making less than 58,656 per year, regardless of the FTE, actually cannot be exempt from overtime provisions. And that's the biggest and main change in the FLSA overtime provisions. Now, you also can see that every 3 years, Department of Labor recommends increasing salary standard test. The main debate about this is why not to have public debate and make a notice and before we publish it. We'll discuss it a little later. There were history, actually, of legal challenges. As I mentioned, in 2016, Department of Labor already tried that. And the same actual court, federal district court in Texas, blocked the recommendation to increase salary standard test. There was challenge, and of course, we will talk about what we recommend now at this point, right after we discuss highly compensated employees and the business legal environment. This also is a big development. As you can see, the highly compensated employees standard test goes from 107,432 before this new rule to 151,164. Now it's a big increase. So it's a more than 40% increase in this threshold. And of course, wages increased dramatically at that time. This number, by the way, includes commission and non-discretionary compensation. It will count factor for it, but will not include any credit for lodging, payments for medical or retirement contribution and all that. And then in the end, no matter how highly paid, if you have blue collar or technical employees who are by duty test, do manual blue collar work, routine, repetitive, technical support, you cannot use, and they make more they add or above $151,000, you still cannot make them exempt. So let's say if you have HVAC mechanic making $152,000, they're still non-exempt by duty test. That tells us two things. First of all, their limit and duty test is prevalent. And second is that we HR folks are in the wrong profession probably. Next slide will show the actual challenge. What happened in 2016 was expected, as it was expected again this year. The labor groups filed lawsuit in the U.S. District Court, Eastern District Court of Texas. Their main basically concern in 2016, and it is the same now, is that so why then we need duties test to determine whether job or employee is exempt or non-exempt if we limiting this by or creating salary threshold. For courts, this is their rationale. They say essentially makes an employee's duty test irrelevant. And of course, also concluded that the salary basis threshold could not be increased every 3 years. Some labor groups and courts against this, they say you should provide public notice. You should have some kind of debate, opportunity for public to comment. And this rhetoric, this dispute has kind of two sides. One is, yeah, really, why we do have a standard salary test, but we also have duties test. So why to have both of them, which basically diminishes or reduces the influence of duties test, which is the core of how we determine exemption in FLSA. Department of Labor stand, I mean, they didn't publicly announce this, but this is what we assume, is that we need both in order to protect employees and make sure that employees are not being misclassified as exempt when some employers may accidentally inflate their duties or make duties sound like they are more exempt from overtime. And that conversation is still going. This time, however, limited injunction by the court only applies to state of Texas, not like it was in 2016, it was basically blocked. Labor trends in business environment are essential to understand this debate and actually what's going on and what's behind the rationale and what's behind the initiative to increase salary standard test and keep increasing it in the future. So for that reason, we really need to understand how labor market changed in the United States in last decades. And before I go there, any questions so far, Vicky?
Nothing yet, Igor.
Okay, thank you. Over 135 million workers today in more than 7 million workplaces are protected and covered by Federal Labor Standards Act. It's enforced by Wage and Hour Division of the United States Department of Labor. In states, it's usually called Wage and Hour Administration or governed by Industrial Commission, so on and so forth. Now, labor force, as you can see today, like next morning, 164,482,600 people will wake up and will go to work. Well, some of them will stay in work remotely, of course. Only 32.8 million of those are exempt from overtime provisions today. Actually, 33.8 million today. And as you can see, exemption grew, but also the total workforce grew to 169 million since 2022. Now, this is a statistics that actually allows us to take a look and understand in perspective. You can see that only 20% are exempt. So we can say that only 2 people out of 10 in our workplace are exempt from overtime provisions. So if you have more than that, you think about that. And how is it that you are above national statistics? majority of workers are non-exempt from overtime provisions of FLSA today, and misclassifying them or inaccurate calculation of overtime must be avoided by the HR departments. And this is pretty much the reason we have this conversation. There's also 18,566,000 openings currently, as reported by Bureau of Labor Statistics last week, I checked. Now, 18.5 million new jobs as of today to be filled by employers in the United States. They need to be reviewed. They need to be determined whether they can be exempt or non-exempt from overtime provision. And of course, it's our HR practitioners' role to educate management, explain how we do that, why we do that, conduct a thorough class review and duties test if needed. And we'll talk about duties test. And of course, stand our grounds, because some employers, some department heads will request, which we had this experience. I'm not sure if you do, but we saw that some department heads request that this employee in this specific position needs to be exempt from overtime. And sometimes the reasoning behind that request is not the right one. It's not the valid one. Like, well, I need this person to work sometimes evenings because this person organizing the events, and I cannot always pay over. Well, that's exactly the wrong reason why we request exemption from overtime.
Igor, I'm sorry,
yes.
can you go back to that slide? I have a couple of questions here.
Yes.
In that chart, those are numbers, correct? Those are counts, not currency.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's
Yes,
okay. No,
those are not number. I'm so sorry. Those are number of people. Yes, not the
Okay,
dollars, not the
thank you.
currency.
Thank you for that clarification. And then we had another question. Working HVAC supervisor are presently considered exempt in this person's organization. With this present ruling, would this position be eligible for overtime? I know we probably can't make a determination on the fly like this, but
Yes, and this is good question. I'd like to discuss that. Can we answer it later?
yes, absolutely.
We'll come back to this. And again, sorry about those. This is another manifestation of us compensation professionals, practitioners, always measure everything by dollar sign. So, okay, let's go to characteristics of the current labor market. So, what is happening in the labor market actually predetermined DOL's decision that this is the time to increase standard salary threshold and say you cannot consider anybody to be exempt if they don't make at least this amount of money. And those are current trends: low unemployment. Even though labor markets are cooling, as suggested by economists, there's still high demand for skilled labor, and there's still very low unemployment in the United States. And of course, pressure on HR departments, especially in certain industries, on hiring more qualified staff, and lack of that staff brings wages up and requires HR departments to revisit their pay structures and their pay ranges, their market analysis, their internal job evaluations. Shrinking blue-collar sector, tremendous and very important critical trend now. And all HR department, I think, should be very much worried about this because, and we'll show it in the slide, this is a trend. We need more of them. AI still cannot do some of those jobs. And instead of increasing, because as the economy growing, and of course, number of employers growing, number of blue-collar jobs is not growing that fast. And some of those blue-collar jobs actually shift from or transition from blue-collar to white-collar. So yesterday they were non-exempt, today they are exempt because of added technology or added complexity, because jobs evolved and they become more complex. All this brings to next trend, which is inconsistent wage inflations. Last year, transportation and materials moving workers had higher pay increases than workers in education sector. Healthcare workers had higher wage increases than workers in the hospitality industry. And even inside of each industry, like inside of materials moving, inside of healthcare, some jobs grow faster, higher than the others. This is the reality of today's labor market. As you know, wages grew in 2022 and 2023 in unprecedented rates. Average increase for last decades was less than 3% for employees. In 2022, it was 5.2%. Average increase for all civilian workers in the United States, which is double what it was last decade. And then, of course, wave of pay equity. And pay equity transformed the workplaces and experienced this transformation from just a law, just a rule of law, just the mandate of federal or state legislators to actually be in the culture of the organization. We have so many clients and so many organizations that now conducting their pay equity audits and ask us to help them with that. And that is something to consider. As this is happening, the wages changing. And the last one is, of course, industrial migration. I don't want to talk much about this, but in very short, as you know, workers moving all the time, and they moving. Some move for because they get ready for retirement in the next few years or next decade. But many of them moving just because they're jobs. They're moving from Midwest. That's national statistics, and from East they moving to East, Southeast, Southwest, and West. That's pretty much what's happening in the United States. I mean, Texas employment is growing faster than in many other states. Nevada's employment growing faster. In Arizona, Phoenix becomes the capital of the world in chip making now. California continue growing its high-tech industry and so on and so forth. I'm going to the next slide. Any questions?
Nope, we're good. Thank you, Igor.
Okay. So what's happening with blue-collar jobs and why non-exempt threshold or exemption threshold going so high now? First of all, you can see on the chart on the right, on these bars represent growing number of percentage of jobs. The blue bars represent growing number of jobs that now require bachelor's degree, but they're still blue-collar jobs. They're not professional level exempt. They're blue-collar, non-exempt jobs, but they do now require bachelor's degree. The orange bar represents jobs that actually don't require bachelor's degree or high school or apprenticeship or less than bachelor's degree. And that number actually is shrinking. You can see minus 5% in the projected in the next 5 years. And the last one, the gray bar, says that total blue-collar growth is slowing down dramatically. I mean, it was growing 3% in 2012, and now projected to grow only 1 percentage point. That tells you that, again, two main trends here. One, explain this. One is some blue-collar jobs get whiter. They cross that threshold to become exempt from non-exempt. So from blue collar, they become white collar. Others.
Igor, sorry, quick
Yes,
question.
yes.
Why are blue collar non-exempt jobs increasingly requiring a 4-year college degree?
Because they get complex, because of change in technology, change in requirements. The jobs actually become change in decision-making authority. The simple example in government would be the operators that control water distribution or water quality or water cleaning systems. They used to be, those operators used to control gauges and monitor them. Now they work in SCADA, the electronic computer system, and they have to do some predictions or some forecast. They have to extrapolate sometimes. They have to use computer system for that and do modeling. So this job from blue collar, no decision making, short menu or narrow menu of options become more complex, more responsible, and as that they, because they make more decision, they exercise discretion and judgment. That's exactly why jobs can be reclassified and designated as non-exempt from as exempt from overtime. So that's what's happening with some of those blue collar jobs. I hope I answered that question.
You did. Thank you for that great example.
Thank you. So let's go and talk about changing work and how it affects wages. Just 1 second. I have, okay. Workplace composition. So, and those are pretty much result in some violations. Like a study predict that percentage of job needed college degree. Those jobs will grow and now higher. You can see that decade over decade, we have more and more jobs that actually require prolonged study. That, again, answering that previous question. And as they require bachelor's degree, this is exact prerequisite for being exempt from overtime provision. This is as a result of this trend, high school diploma jobs in 2021 and now further, as you can see, had higher wage increases than college graduate jobs. So you can see the blue line here is percentage increases in high school jobs that require high school versus college graduate, orange line, in 2022 and 2023, and 2021, of course, had higher increases. And some of them you can see go to almost 7% a year, those increases. Any questions about this?
No, thanks, Igor.
Okay. And new rule published by Department of Labor project that it will create 4 million more non-exempt jobs. And while this is an estimate, it's very close to, we believe that that's what's going to happen. Some blue collar jobs turn white collar, as we already discussed. A thorough duties test is required when you do that, by the way, when you make them exempt. So not only salary threshold they have to meet, but also his duties test actually suggests that they can be exempt from overtime. We pretty much answered that question, why they go white and how to mitigate this. We often being asked, so what do we do? Because future for blue collar jobs actually look very dark. And we say the retraining, retention, that those are the keys, accurate and fair pay administration. We have to motivate them to stay. We have to retrain people, and you have to make sure that they're happy and they have all the tools to perform jobs successfully, and their career is growing, they still can grow within non-exempt designation. And now, if there's any more questions, I can answer. Otherwise, we go to the poll.
Yeah, let's go ahead and open the next poll, please, Marissa. Poll number 3. Great, thank you. In your experience, what are the most frequent FLSA oversights? And this is just free form. Whatever you want to enter into the box is great. We'll take a look at it once everybody's responded. And I'm going to mute myself. Evidently, there's some background noise here at the office that's distracting. So, Marissa, if you can just let me know when the responses start slowing down, then we can close the poll.
Will do. They're coming in slowly but surely. Take your time in writing your responses. We have about 32 responses right now. I'll leave it open a little longer. All right, I think about 20 more seconds will do. All right, I'm gonna close it. We have about 47 responses right now, and I'll go ahead and get them shared. Are you able to see them, Vicki?
I can't see them on my end. Igor, can you see the responses?
No.
I can't either.
We might have to process those later.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me see if I can get them to pop up one way. I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, that's okay. We can take a look at those later and maybe offer some insights. We did anticipate that you might mention the next offerings in poll question number 4. So we actually listed some of the FLSA violations that we see, and the next poll is just interested in getting your opinion on which one of these are most often misunderstood. And so, Marissa, you can open up our last poll number 4, if you don't mind, please.
Opened. Give you guys a few moments to get your responses in.
And this one I actually see. It's probably because the previous one did not have the options.
Responses still coming in, Marissa?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close it. We have about 100 responses now.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and share those results.
Oh, our top one won, Igor.
Yes, as we expected.
Yes, as we expected. I don't know. I know you're going to be talking a little bit about these violations, so I don't know that we necessarily need to go over the poll results, but this
Yes,
is exactly what we see in the field as well.
yes. Misclassification of jobs and inaccurate calculation of overtime are two most common. And should I go and continue presentation?
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually was able to pull the results from the last poll. I can read some for you if you'd like.
Would you?
Okay, sure.
Sure. So the question was, in your experience, what are the most frequent FLSA oversights? Many issues with overtime pay, determining if an employee is actually exempt or non-exempt. More oversight when laws change and not keeping up with those changes. Proper record keeping, misclassification of exempt status. Still being a novice to FLSA, no experience at all, flex schedules, overtime pay issues again, um, managers that are reluctant, finance team, overtime hours, overtime versus comp time eligibility. A lot of great answers here.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing
Thank you.
those.
Sure.
And it's pretty much very consistent with what we have in our list of common violations. And as you know, uh, from Starbucks to Google, uh, any company can have those violations, and they being investigated by courts. There's many uh, class action lawsuits, and we'll talk more about actually what is happening, how employers misclassify or how employers misunderstand some FLSA provisions. Misclassification of jobs and workers is one of the very common. We also have prorating salaries for part-time workers. We'll discuss it more in detail. It's basically if you have a exempt employee and the employee is working half of FTE, 40 hours pay period, or 20 hours a week. And you think, well, the new threshold is as of today, salaries test is $43,888. Anybody who is making less than that cannot be exempt anymore. And my part-time employee is making 40. So if I annualize it, it's $80,000. So my employee does make this threshold and does meet the standard test requirement. Well, the law, unfortunately, does not recognize part-timers. And the law doesn't care what's the FTE. They just say if you don't meet 43,888, you cannot be exempt. Inaccurate calculation of overtime, we'll discuss a little more, but it's how we interpret the law. And law says it's 1 time plus half of regular rate, but regular is not a base rate. And of course, improper treatment of employee as independent contractor, failure to record and pay for all hours worked, and confusion between federal and state laws. Let's talk about some specifics. And I will go real quick because we have time limit. Employers may try to avoid paying overtime by inflating titles. They basically say, well, you know what, I'm going to make you manager. But misrepresenting level of decision-making and authority can be easily detected by Wage and Hour Administration. And employees actually know that. Some of those complaints come from employees. They say, well, they made me exempt, but so I don't receive overtime anymore. And Wage and Hour would say, you depriving employee of overtime by misclassifying this employee on purpose. Misjudging time spent on supervisory function. Some of the HVAC supervisor, let's say, how much time this person spends actually on supervising. because law says it should be majority of time, and it should be specific to and very clear to supervisory duties, which again defined by the law as ability and authority to hire, fire, discipline, evaluate, train, and so on and so forth. Now, at some point, some of those Starbucks employees and your HVAC supervisor as well, somebody called in sick, this HVAC supervisor will go on the roof and start working hands-on as HVAC mechanic majority of the day, and that may compromise this employee's exemption. So while we understand, the only supervisor exemption can be awarded to the job is if supervisory responsibility is core responsibility of that job, and they don't do hands-on work with the people who they actually supervise. Now, their subordinates ask for help, and they help. That compromises exemption. Some supervisors spend most of their time performing hands-on work with their subordinates. Some managers perform routine repetitive tasks along with managing unit. And only duties test, no title test, duties test will tell you what it is. Miscalculating overtime is also an issue. In many cases, overtime based on regular rate, which should include some additional payments, stipends, shift differentials, like for example, Google. They are being sued by non-exempt employees because they believe that stock units, those payments and commissions should be included in overtime for calculating in the regular rate for calculating overtime. And if it wasn't included, so you basically minimizing the amount of time and a half of actual earnings, actual payment of overtime.
Igor,
yes.
Just quick question here that I think we could break in to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a risk in having exempt employees clock in and out, which documents when they work more than 40 hours?
Why would they clock in? Yes. When you start treating exempt employees as non-exempt, you actually give signal that they may not be exempt. Why would you make them clock in and out? Do you need to control their time? If you do, make them non-exempt. If you believe they're not working full 40 hours and you want them to be there 40 hours, the whole premise of overtime exemption is that the Department of Labor at some point understood that some jobs cannot be measured by time. Your artists, your managers, as long as department is performing well and manager work 38 hours a week, I wouldn't consider this strong violation. So yes, I think it may be an issue when you make employees clock in and out. Of course, with one caveat. Right now, some safety and OSHA regulations, because there's such a big wave and big trend of working at home or remotely. That is something that may be considered as a new policy, because you have to make sure they actually at work, because you liable for these employees. If something happens with them on work time, you liable. I hope I answered that question, that didn't make it even more confusing.
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. Meal breaks, another issue. And again, law is very clear on that. If you can dock 30 minutes, but if you do, make sure that they are resting. You're not calling them back. And it's better if they are outside of the actual workplace. You cannot tell employees, do you agree to waive your overtime? If you do, sign it. You can't do that. And you can have policy that they have to request overtime in advance. It's good to have that policy for cost control, for budgetary control. But if they don't have, but if they do have policy and they still worked overtime and they didn't get approval, you still have to pay overtime. Of course, what do we do about this? I mean, what's the conceptual framework? What's the guidelines we use? And that's the actually important part of our conversation. We use concept of job enlargement versus job enrichment, where how many employees you know, how many instances you HR practitioners had when employee come to you and they say, I'm working 2 jobs now. I'm an accountant, but I also payroll administrator. And I'm not asking for 2 salaries, but I do ask for pay increase. Well, those are 2 components, 2 types of jobs, of the job that actually have the same internal and external value. So it's job enlargement. You just have broader scope, or not scope, broader amount of work. The enrichment is when jobs become more complex, has higher decision making, has better or deeper, requires deeper knowledge, and so on and so forth. The next one would be job analysis. And this is how we basically perform duties test. We have to understand those jobs. And of course, you also have to challenge status quo. I mean, so again, you will have many requests that makes no sense to you. So you have to be able to explain that, no, this is non-exempt job. We really cannot make this exempt. Let's go to the basically our recommended rule of thumb. When you're in doubts, if it's 50-50, make them non-exempt. Because it's not illegal to make them exempt, you just will pay more in overtime. But if you make them exempt, I'm sorry, it's not illegal to make exempt employee non-exempt, but to make an error on the other side, that can be you can be liable for that. You can be not in compliance. Also, independent contractors. When you start, again, the same way, you start treating employees, independent contractor as employees, which you exercise control over this, you make them use your tools, you want to see what's the process and you regulate that process, they're no longer independent contractors. And if you treat them as employees, you have to pay them as employees. There are 3 main exemptions you can use to treat exempt employees from overtime provision. Of course, executive, administrative, and professional. There's a couple of more, and we'll discuss it in a second. But the key is to separate, to understand the distinction between blue collar and white collar job. How are they different? How to determine eligibility. You have 2 tests. One is salary basis, and another one is duties test. Of course, professional. The key here is prolonged study, the jobs that require prolonged study, like doctors. You're not going to hire a doctor without MD or lawyer without JD. Executives, the key is they have to really conduct business, supervise 2 or more full-time employees. Administrative, discretion and judgment, business-related work, policy development, exercise of independent judgment and discretion with respect to matters of significance. Professional could be creative, like you're an artist. Who's to say how long, how many hours you need to, to finish the painting? And of course, computer professionals have some specific rules, like it has to be application of systems analysis. It has to be broad menu of options, decision making, solutions that you brought to the job. And of course, employee primary duty when you're outside sales is you focus on sales, and you're not sitting at. There were some cases when telephone sales were considered to be exempt. They're not. They're sitting on the phone. They're making those calls. They bind it to this workplace. They non-exempt employees. The process is, again, simple. The test is out there. You ask question. If the answer is no, you're non-exempt. You ask next question. If the answer is no, you're non-exempt. You proceed through those questions, and you make sure that you positively answer all those questions, and the answer is yes, and there's no doubts. And again, I'm kind of can repeat myself. If we use this rule, if in doubts, if it's slight doubt, make them non-exempt. Take a look at this table here. Let's discuss this real quick. So you run staff report of all exempt staff today and see their salaries. And let's examine Adam. This is what you do with this new rule. I mean, before January 1st, we recommend you take a look, you run just this kind of a table. And okay, this is full-time employees in finance, accounting senior, and that employee is making 55,867 below the new threshold of 58,656. So what do? Either make this employee non-exempt or add $2,789 to make this employee meeting standard salary test as of January 1st. Now you can see here permit supervisor actually meet the standard test, 60,203. So does Angel, assistant fleet manager, with 58,657 by $1 meets the standard salary test. Now you can see also emergency coordinator here with part-time 40 hours in pay period, does not meet the test. You cannot annualize it, just doesn't meet the test, period. It's not 80,000, it's not 78,000, it's 39,104 regardless of FTE. Pay this person 19,552 or make them non-exempt. But here's another delicate issue. What if permit supervisor is actually accounting supervisor? You can see accounting senior would be reporting this accounting supervisor. And as we bring accounting senior, if you decide to keep accounting senior exempt, that accounting senior now will be making about $59,000. What do you see here? Between the salaries of supervisor and subordinate, you will see what we call pay compression, or some call compaction. That is dysfunctional policy. That is not good for employees. They don't like it. And it's really not a good idea to have the subordinate making the same or more than supervisor, because this person here will be so close to the superior who obviously has more experience. I hope this help you with your future classification, reclassification, and FLSA thresholds and duties test review. Any questions?
Hi, Igor. Thank you again for being here. And before we get into the last of our questions, I'll just do my little closeout here. So thank you, Vicky and Igor, for such an enlightening presentation from the engagement. I think we all found it very valuable. So just a few things. As a reminder to our attendees, this webinar has been recorded and will be available for replay on the CPS HR YouTube and webinar homepage on our website. Be sure to check it out and share with your colleagues. At CPS HR Consulting, we're committed to partnering with government and nonprofit organizations. Our suite of services and products range from organizational culture, recruitment, training, test rental, classification, compensation, and so much more. If you're looking to transform your organization, contact us to see how we can tailor our services to meet your unique needs. Lastly, we invite you to share feedback on today's session. Please take a moment to complete our short survey that will appear after the webinar. Once again, thank you, Igor and Vicky, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Our next webinar is scheduled for September 18th on engaging your Hispanic/Latino workforce in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. We hope to see you there.